Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melissa Lieberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to this week's episode. I have such a treat for you today. I am honored to welcome Jon Younger Ph.D. to this episode to share with you all of his insights and wealth of knowledge and experience about what it takes to succeed as an independent consultant. If we were to wrap up our entire conversation into one theme, it really focuses on what it takes to succeed as an independent consultant. Jon is a legend. He is someone who has been a freelancer and independent consultant for a long time, really a pioneer in this method of working, in this way of working. He owns his own boutique consultancy firm. He's an early stage investor. He's an author for Harvard Business Press and others. He's a Forbes contributor. He is really one of the people you think about when the topic future of work comes up. And so I wanted to bring him on the podcast today because he has such a unique perspective to share with us. He does so much research around the globe on what the future of work, what's happening now with the evolution of work and the way we do work, especially as freelancers and consultants, and has a really important perspective that he shares with us in this episode, in this interview, where we look at both the consultant side of the equation and what you can be doing to run your business more effectively and to succeed, especially past the 4 stages that he'll share with you, the 4 stages of freelancing and consulting, and what it looks like to succeed when others drop off during those stages. And then we turn the conversation over to the buyer side, the consulting buyer's perspective, and what they're thinking about when they're choosing to engage either a large consulting firm like a McKinsey or an independent consultant like you. What's in their mind and how they're thinking about the way that they're buying and how you can stand out in that process so that you land more business that's fulfilling and high quality and high paying. So I'm really thrilled to be able to share this conversation with you. And before we dive into the conversation, I would also love to encourage you to subscribe to Jon's newsletter. It's called the Freelance Focus. He and a few other partners got together. They produce a weekly newsletter that is focused on all things freelancing, again, from the perspective of the freelancers and consultants, and also from the perspective of marketplaces and from the perspective of companies that hire consultants. So it's an incredible resource for all of us. And you can go find that at freelance-focus.com. And with that, let's dive into this conversation. Can't wait for you to hear it and take away all that Jon has to share in order for you to succeed as an independent consultant. Jon, welcome to the podcast. I'm so thrilled you're here with us today. You and I have met through Open Assembly, which is a future of work organization and forum. And I always am so eager to listen to what you have to share in that forum and also to read the articles that you write for the New York Times and for Forbes on the future of work and freelancing. And I know you've been a freelancer for a long time after having left a really successful corporate career. So I'm really excited to welcome you to the podcast today for the listeners to hear your perspective on the future of freelancing, the future of work, and how they can be successful.
Thank you, Melissa. And first of all, it's an honor to be on your podcast. And second, I wish my mother were alive to hear your introduction. It would warm her heart that she would feel secure in the knowledge that her child had done a few things right. That is outstanding. Thank you so much.
Amazing. I love it. Well, Jon, I would love for us to start off here. As you know, the podcast is focused on helping independent consultants grow their business. I would
Yes,
love for you to start off and give us a little bit of introduction about your history as a freelancer, as a consultant,
sure,
and what you're focused on now.
sure. And may I also start by saying anybody who's an independent management consultant or anybody that's thinking about that, or anybody that's currently a management consultant operating in a firm, a McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG or one of the many, many other organizations that do consulting. There are 70,000 around the world that call themselves consultants. And I have just written in Forbes, it was published yesterday, an article that quotes a dozen of the largest platforms, the CEOs of the largest independent management consulting platforms, on their view of the next couple of years. And I will tell you, Melissa, that to a person, they see this year as a year of sorting out. And most are finding a very welcome response by companies to independent management consultants as they realize A, the limitations of traditional consultants, B, the cost differential, and three, access to some of the folks that are doing particularly interesting things. So it's a very interesting time in consulting for individuals who are thinking about becoming or continuing to consult as a career.
Yeah. It is such an exciting and dynamic time. And we'll dive in here in a minute into the future of work side of this and what buyers are thinking, consulting
Sure.
buyers are thinking. John, tell us again, when you're talking
About
about
me.
70,000, what are the 70,000
So
platforms?
So there are not 70,000 platforms, but there are
Okay.
70,000 consulting firms, platforms, and organizations, people
Okay.
who have joined together to provide more than individual consulting. So it's a really fulsome time in the consulting industry. I'll tell you a little bit about my background, not too much. I'm not that interesting a guy. I the wonderful opportunity to be a shower curtain packer in a shower curtain manufacturing company in Brooklyn. For those of you that are listening, Middle Village, Brooklyn, to be specific. And there were four of us that packed the shower curtains that went into a truck and were taken off to stores, wherever. And the four of us had an idea. And our idea was we could collaborate and do this together. And so two of us would pack, two of us would bring the boxes to the truck, and we actually increased the productivity of the place pretty significantly. We were feeling very good, very, very good. And the assistant manager of the plant came over and he said, "What are you doing?" And college boy here, because the other three lived in the hood, college boy here thought that he'd be helpful by saying, "Well, we decided that it would be really helpful to increase productivity, to two of us to do this and two of us to do that." And he cut me short. And excuse me for my potty mouth, Melissa. I hope the producer
It's
won't cut
okay.
this particular bit, but he said, "When I fucking well want more productivity, I'll fucking well ask for it. And until then, do your goddamn job." It took about 1 minute to realize my future. And that was what an interesting moment to realize that there had to be a better way to work. There had to be a better way to manage. There had to be a better way to organize. There needed to be value placed not just on controlling employees as if you were a colonialist master servant relationship, but rather that that guy might have said, instead of "when I'm fucking well ready to be more productive, I'll tell you," he might have said, "Thank you for taking the initiative to improve our performance as an organization. How can I support you in the future?" But instead, he was a boss, not an enabler, not an empowerer, not a supporter, not an encourager, not a motivator. He was a boss. And I hope that all 70,000 firms in the United States that may be listening to this right now, or just two or three, will hear that our collective responsibility as we think about the future of work generally, and as we think about the future of work for consulting and consultants, our obligation is to make sure that that assistant manager doesn't come back again, that there's a better way to make things work. That's what brought me to it. I took a doctorate at the University of Toronto. I taught a little bit. I continue to teach from time to time at universities as a guest lecturer or as an adjunct professor, but I am still excited after 45 years of helping organizations to find a better way to manage and support their employees. So that's it, kind of in the nutshell.
What a story, John. I'll quickly tell you a story that's related and then we'll dive into the meat today. But it just reminds me, my grandfather, when he, during World War II, we have a family cattle ranch. So he comes from this ranch and goes into the service, and they give him this job to clean up something with a pitchfork, a bunch of straw. And so he starts telling the sergeant or whatever how to do this better. And shortly he was deployed as a scout to the front line. Like, we do not want to hear any of your ideas about how to improve
Thanks
this.
for helping, right?
Now you can go do the job that literally has a lifespan that's calculated in minutes. Luckily he survived, but anyway.
Thank goodness.
Here we are today. So, John, I would love to organize our conversation today into kind of two parts because you have such a unique perspective. You work so much with enterprises and you know how they're thinking about buying consulting. And then on the other side of the equation, you spend so much time thinking about things from the freelancer and independent consultants perspective. So if we kind of organize ourselves in those two realms, I think it'll really help to bring to light a lot of things that consultants can leverage from a success perspective.
Happy to do it.
Yeah. So when we start thinking about starting off on the consulting side, one of the things that stands out to me is a recent article that you wrote in Forbes called The 4 Stages of Early Freelancing. And I would love it if you would share more about those 4 stages of freelancing, which I think also encompasses consulting. If it
does indeed.
Yeah, so we're using freelancing here as an overarching term, which includes consulting. So would you share more about what that research was and what you learned about those 4 stages and how it applies to the consultant who's listening?
And I'll try to reflect 2 personas. Let's see if I can. One persona is the experienced consultant who decides to go independent. The other is the new graduate, perhaps, that sees an opportunity to be an independent consultant from the very beginning. So the data from our survey was really the survey that provides the data for this particular article was 2,000 people, primarily full-time freelancers rather than part-time moonlighters. And they represented about 77 platforms in about 30 countries. So it's a pretty good mix. And here's what we found. We found that the first year as an independent consultant or as an independent freelancer in general, that's pretty tough. You got to learn all kinds of things. You got to learn how to manage your time. You got to learn how to deal with clients. You've got to learn how to attract clients. You've got to figure out what your brand is, because who knows what's selling out there. You've got to figure out how to connect it up to in-demand kinds of issues for these companies. You've got to decide whether you want to shoot for enterprise or you want to shoot for SMB or you want to help with scale-ups. It's a lot of decisions to make. And then you got to organize yourself to deliver that. You've got to deliver it. And you've got to get feedback and find the next cohort of customers. That's a big job. And an awful lot of people take a year to figure out that that's not the right thing that they want to do. And so they leave freelancing. But there are other people that after that year, they're starting to get a wind to their back. They're starting to figure out how to make it work. They're starting to be successful. They're starting to build their clientship and manage clients successfully. And for the next couple of years, they're doing great. And then they hit another decision point. And that is, first phase was, I didn't know how to do this. Second phase is, I know how to do it and I'm doing pretty good. Third phase, Melissa, is this what I want to do for my life? Is this what I want to do for my career? And that drops people back down in sort of satisfaction and motivation a little bit because they're trying to figure out, is this their path or was it a temporary path to something else? And it takes people a couple of years to figure that out because there's a lot of choices to make. And a lot of people drop out again and look for full-time work or decide they want to be entrepreneurs, not solopreneurs, et cetera. And a bunch of people stay in. And then they get excited again. They get remotivated. They get re-encouraged because this is a decision they've made and they know that they're good at it. So those are the 4 stages of early freelancing. Now, imagine the challenge of that first year from somebody who was a McKinsey. Let's use McKinsey because it's a particularly interesting thing. So McKinsey, you were a McKinsey associate, you were McKinsey as engagement manager, but you were one of those folks that either decided that you didn't want to continue to work for McKinsey or you were removed and invited to become an alumni member because they make pretty deep cuts at each point in career. Now think about who you are. You join a freelance platform or you try to be freelance on your own. And what's changed? Well, you're not getting in the black car going to the airport. You're not flying first class or business class. You're not going to a 4 or 5-star hotel. You're not walking into your client and everybody's waiting for you and there's probably a sign saying, welcome so-and-so, and you're not feeling very much like hot shit. And the problem that you had was that you thought it was you and not your consulting firm. You thought you were the reason that you were being successful, not being one of 34,000 members of the consulting team at McKinsey. That's the first year. That's what makes it hard in that first year. There's a psychological adjustment at the same time, and there's a practical adjustment in terms of how you do this. Now, imagine that you're a new grad, you've got an MBA, you went to Harvard, you went to Sloan, you went to Wharton, and you were the top student in your class. And let's hope that you picked an area that was in demand, but let's assume that you didn't. It's a tough sled. How do you get your first client? Who do you want to work with? Are there people that can help you? How do you set this up? No wonder the first year is a tough one, but you do learn and you do figure it out and you may continue. So those are the 4 early stages, but the thing that is most important about that is recognizing in that first year that ultimately running an individual consultancy or deciding to build a consulting firm or working as an independent has all of the challenges that running a local corner deli has. It's the same job. You got to figure out a name for yourself. You got to figure out a brand. You got to figure out where you're going to work from. You've got to figure out what equipment you need. I mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the first year. The more that you can participate with others in a way that helps you to figure that out sooner rather than later, the better off you'll be. And my guess is, and I don't know for certain, but my guess is that you kind of lose half the population at each of those 3 or 4 points. So at the end of the day, the 1,000 people that started out maybe end up being, what, a couple of hundred. But there are a couple of hundred people that are at that point experienced, knowledgeable, and likely successful freelance consultants. So that's kind of the 4 or 5 years of it. Does that help? Is that interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a few things to highlight that you shared, Jon, are the first stage of really a lot of times we discount the amount of ramp up time that is required because there's no capital outlay. There's no, like to your deli point, we're not buying anything to start this business, beyond maybe a laptop because you used to have one that your company gave you, right? So as we start that first year, it can be kind of misleading the amount of effort that is required to start up the business from, like you said, a logistical perspective. But even what I find so much even more important a lot of times is the psychological side of it.
Sure.
Like you were describing, our identity oftentimes is attached to, the corner office that we had achieved or the consulting firm and the, blue chip label that it
Very
has.
tough. And Melissa, I will add to what you're saying that when we look at the categories, there are sort of 4 categories, 4 main categories. Category 1 is independent management consulting, and there are many, many, many people involved in that around the world. And add to that interim management, add to that some other stuff. Second category is marketing and creative services. Third category is tech, obviously. And then there's a 4th category, which is sort of everything else, right? When you take a look at the relationship, when you take a look at the satisfaction of freelancers in the 3 main categories, so consulting, creative and marketing services, and tech, freelance management consultants are the least satisfied and most frustrated of those three. And they are because we don't give the same credibility, credit, and respect to independent management consulting that we give to traditional management consulting when we use it. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is they've spent gazillions of dollars on branding. They have very large populations. They've done a good job over many years. But the other thing is we haven't done a very good job in figuring out how to demonstrate our professionalism in a way that causes so many of these smaller platforms to be seen as competitive with a McKinsey or a BCG or a PwC. Now, the crazy part of it is that there's a pretty good chance when you hire McKinsey or BCG or Bain or any of these others, that a third of the team will be freelancers. Mm. Now, they may be alumni of your consulting firm, but they'll be freelancers. So you're already working with freelancers in the work that most organizations are doing, particularly enterprise businesses. And so we have a challenge. And the challenge is, and it's more than independent management consulting, but it is a large challenge for independent management consulting. And that is, how do we demonstrate our bona fides? How do we demonstrate our credibility so that we are seen in the same way as an alternative to, rather than a second choice of?
That's so powerful. I think so many times as the independent consultants that listen and that I work with, that mindset is so critical, Jon, that we're seen as building up a brand and building up that specialization and building up and looking at themselves as someone who is a powerful alternative to a management consulting firm or, one of the big four, rather than, as you just described it, a second choice.
Yes. And one of the challenges around this is really, it's interesting. When we did our research, when we did our global survey, one of the things that we asked was, what do you like to the freelancers that participate? We gave them a whole long series of attributes, everything from friendly to good networker to quizzical, et cetera, et cetera. When you take a look at the areas where freelancers across the board rated themselves lowest, it was in those very things that they've got to do. They don't like selling. They don't like networking. They don't like persuading people. They like doing the work. And they don't enjoy, for the most part, all of those things that surround and enable the work. Well, that's a problem. So if you don't like networking and you don't like selling and you don't like persuading, it's tough to get a lot of work unless you have a big brand behind you. So when we're talking about those four stages of early freelancing, one of the most important is inviting them to get out of their skin, inviting them to learn the very things that they thought they were going to learn. They thought they'd get to avoid all that stuff by freelancing. In fact, they just got right into the pool. So what do you need to be successful as an initial consultant? Well, there's 3 or 4 things that you need. One, as you just said, you need a brand. I mean, people need to know, when to call you, why to call you, who to call you. The second is you need these days to be focused on outbound messaging. A long time ago, my wife Carolyn and I have been partners forever. And Carolyn took a call once 15 years ago when I was still consulting. And she said, how can I help you? And he said, well, Jon doesn't know me, but I know him by reputation, and we'd like to hire him to do some work. And she said, well, can you tell me something about yourself? And he said, yes, I'm the Secretary of Agriculture. Carolyn goes, does he know you? And he goes, no, but I know him, and we'd like him to help us with something. That doesn't exist too much anymore. That was an old school reality when there's more demand than supply. There's plenty of supply now, and there's not as much demand. So people aren't getting a lot of calls from the Secretary of Agriculture saying, come and work for us. That means that you got to build your brand. You got to keep sending your brand out. You got to do all those things that are uncomfortable, like going out and networking, going out and being part of meetups, going out 100 times and telling the story of what you can do differently and better. And that's the second thing you need. You need to be able to identify what you do specially, what you do differently, what you do better. What is your freaking superpower? Because if people don't know when to call you, they don't call you. If people don't know why to call you, they don't call you. Third, you have got to be part of a network, and you've got to invest in that network. There are an awful lot of people that say, well, no, I don't want to be part of a network. I just want you to give me work. I want you to give me work so that I can eat at your table, and then I'll also separately eat at my own table. Doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen. So 3 very specific things: build a brand, identify and continue to build your specialization so that you are an in-demand person, and make sure that your specialization is something that's in demand. There's a story that I'll give you. It's a very sad story, but it's kind of laughable now, 20 years later. I got a call from, can't remember, I think it was Honeywell Bull. Honeywell Bull made big computers. They made the computers that state governments like to run their revenues on, their taxes and stuff like that. And I got a call from the guy in charge of HR, I guess from Honeywell Bull. It was a French company with a big operation in the US. And he said, could you help us? We have 500 power systems engineers, and we don't need any power systems engineers. Who was responsible for that? Well, there were 2. One was the company, because it should have been thinking about what it needed. It should have been thinking about the 500 people that were becoming less and less relevant and done something about that other than just laying them off. And that was a good thing. These guys felt some responsibility. But the second thing was the 500 power systems engineers weren't paying attention, because there were all kinds of clues that was becoming less and less important. X-ray is less and less important in a world of MRI. And so many of our professions turn over generationally. About a third of specializations are no longer relevant generation after generation. You don't want to be the guy or the gal that gets caught saying, I'm really good at something that no longer matters. So those 3, the brand, specialization, and then finally relationships, being part of a network, working as part of a group that gives you greater opportunity, that gives you greater opportunity to continue to grow professionally as well as personally. You got those 3, you're starting pretty good.
Yeah. And that's such powerful advice, Jon, because to your point, for so many consultants, we start out and we love delivering for clients. We love the client work. But to your point, the sales and the marketing and we discount so that piece of it. And a lot of times we think, well, I'm just not good at that, or it doesn't come naturally to me, or I hate it, or those sorts of things. But if you're in this business, you've got to learn how to embrace that and get good at it. And, it's a new challenge. How do I learn how to market and sell myself to those types of ideal clients so that I can be successful doing that, running this type of a business?
And by the way, learning how to sell yourself is important for anything.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, great point.
Great point. Great point. I think it's such a transferable skill. Yeah, absolutely. That we've kind of attached to, I'm selling these services, but your point, we're always selling something, whether we believe that's true or not. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Jon, you've given us so much here on the consultants, from the consultant perspective. Let's switch over now. And I would love to hear your insights from a buyer perspective. So, thinking about from a buyer perspective, and especially with all of the work and research you've been doing on the future of work, tell us, what trends are you seeing with the way that consulting buyers are thinking about engaging consultants?
I think a few things. One is, we're learning that the market is adjusting, that people around the world are starting to see the difference between how and when to use platforms and how and when to use the traditional management consultancies. And we're also seeing a third category coming up, which is Bain did this, which I think is very interesting. So Bain's created something called Engine 2. Do you know about it?
I don't, John.
So Engine 2 is an interesting thing. Bain said to itself, there are many organizations that would like to hire us, but they can't afford us. And so how do we create an affordable alternative? And one answer is, well, you try to automate it, but that's really ridiculous. You can't automate that kind of service very best. You can automate pieces, but you can't automate the relationship. So what they've done is they've gone to many of their alumni, I guess retired as well as people that left, and said, would you be interested in joining our talent cloud, so to speak? And when clients are interested in the lower cost option, and I think you got to be honest that that's what it is, that we'll be able to provide that for them. So we're now starting to see sort of a very interesting three-cornered market. I think that what we described at Bain will happen in some other places as well. We're also seeing, I guess, the other thing that I would say about consulting is that it's flopping over into categories, Melissa, that, sorry to take a minute to try to get my brain and gear around this, but let me give you an example. Zouloo, Zoulloo, is a French-based, Paris-based data science and market research organization. They say they're in the business of data science and insights. Big Robin is in the business of similar business here in the States, data science and insights. Revelio Labs is a New York-based data science and insights place that works a lot with publications. Good Judgment is a New Jersey-based crowdsourcing organization. Hero X is a $100 million crowdsourcing open innovation platform, as is Wozoku, as is Weave, and many others. So one of the questions that I'm wrestling with is, what's a consultancy? What's an open consultancy? What does a platform for consultants look like? And I think what we're finding is that there's more and more categories of that. Now, that has an interesting implication for your folks, and it has a very interesting implication for clients. For your consultants, the people that listen on a regular basis and think about independent consulting, the challenge is, where do I join? If I'm in the business of market research, I can think of that as a consultant, and I can join your firm, or I can join your platform or somebody else's platform, or I can join one of these data science platforms. And I don't really know. Clients don't know either. And so it's getting really, really confusing for clients. So one of the things that clients need is they need to know when to call you. I mean, literally, they need to know when you're the right category for them. And one of the things that would be incredibly valuable for clients is a map. Think about it as a treasure map. I mean, why would I go here versus there? When would I bring the two together? When would I want a combination? When would I want a little bit of this, a little bit of that? So clients are very confused. They're confused because they don't know what door to enter to get some similar things across the doors. And they don't know when a platform has the credibility, the expertise, and can demonstrate the professionalism that they already expect from one of the big multi-billion-dollar firms. What is it that these guys want? So at the end of the day, what they want is exactly what we talked about earlier. They want a chance to work with somebody who wants to work with them. They want a chance to work with somebody that has the expertise and the experience and the specific skills that are important. Hold on to that note, because one of the things that came out of the study and the article that we just published in this was a comment by Leslie Garson, who runs Weem, and it's a consultancy in Paris. And what Leslie said was, we need to take our curation far more seriously than we ever have, because our clients are getting smarter and they want very specific skill sets, not just technically, but professionally. And we've got to be able to demonstrate through our curation, through our knowledge of these folks and our background on these folks and what we know about them. We've got to present them in a way that demonstrates that they have those skills. So one of the things that's happening is that in the absence of a sort of a general view of professionalism, clients are becoming very eyedropper specific in terms of what they want from the individuals that are on their team. The second thing that's true is they want teams, often not just individuals. So third, what we're saying is they want to know you're professional. They want more and more information about your skill set, your experience, your expertise than ever before. You've got to demonstrate it for them. Third, they want to know that you come with other relationships that enable them to form teams that can work together from the get-go. Now, Melissa, you and I both know it's not as easy as just slapping a group of people together and saying it's a team, and hence the importance of looking at those skills. So those three become really, really important criteria for freelance buyers and will become increasingly important in the future. What that says for freelancers is you got to do a good job of the branding. You've got to do a good job of the specialization. You've got to do a good job of working with your freelance platform or independently so that you really have a persuasive set of experiences, skills, et cetera, et cetera. You can demonstrate all of those. It also says, Melissa, something that's very hard at a time of economic uncertainty, and that is you need to figure out what jobs to do and what jobs to not do.
Yeah.
You've got to build a stairway, if I may put it that way. I'll use the example of one of my sons. If you were to take a look at him, and I don't know that he did this intentionally, but his starting point was he worked at Accenture for a couple of years, went from Accenture and worked at a more boutique firm, did that for a couple of years, then worked at PwC as a manager of consultants, then got a job in Hong Kong as the talent manager in this particular case for a region, for the Asia region, and then came back and worked for, in this case, TopTal. So when you sort of see that, what you get is a very clear message from this guy when you see his CV. This is a guy that knows how to consult. This is a guy that knows how to manage clients because he's had that experience. This is a guy who's worked for these clients. This is a guy who's dealt with these projects. That's a powerful basis for getting hired. Every one of the people listening on this call to you should be as thoughtful as they can be about presenting themselves in a fashion that makes it easy to be hired, not difficult. So when you put together your profile, when you use your headshot, when you do all that material, when you share the material with a potential client that you want to share, make sure that you're sending a really well-tied message. Make sure it's organized, make sure it's perfect, and make sure there's a bow on it because people want to know.
Yeah. That cohesive story. We have such small attention spans now. It's got to really pack a punch, that cohesive story that matches to what it is that you want to be offering.
Yep.
Jon, you shared so much here. I want to go back for a moment to
Sure.
one of the things you shared, which is in the mind of a consulting buyer, thinking about 10 years ago, it was so simple. When we were running corporate organizations, we had employees or we had contractors. It was kind of pretty simple. Either we hired the people or we brought them in to work temporarily. And it seemed very simple. What you're describing now is so many different ways that corporate buyers can solve the types of problems that they're having, whether it be going through a marketplace to find talent, whether it be curating talent clouds that they own or that are external talent clouds or some combination of these things, or bringing in independents, like you said, individually, or that have created some kind of a collective or an alliance of some sort. There's so many different ways that consulting buyers or ultimately corporate can solve the problems that they're trying to solve. And a lot of times they don't even know what these solutions are.
Sure.
So what I hear you saying is really helping them to make a decision
Sure.
about how to best solve their problems, and what that looks like can be such a powerful way to get your foot in the door and demonstrate that expertise.
Yes. So the key is, just as you said, How do you build your brand? How do you demonstrate your expertise? How do you show the organizations that you're interested in what you can do? And how do you get in front of them in terms of topics that matter to them for what it's worth? So, for example, I write an article a week. I make $50 per article. So if I'm really productive, I make $250 a month from forums. But as little as that sounds, there are two things that have been wonderful about it. One is I'm constantly in front of my audience. And the second is I really like making that $250 a month. It's a goal, kind of like your goal in losing weight. I just want to know that I can consistently produce that. If I were to give advice to the folks that are listening here, it would be do your version of what I did for me. It may be you speak in conferences. It may be that you organize a group. It may be that you write articles. It may be that you're in LinkedIn and you post stuff. It may be that you're in Medium. It may be any number of things. It could be a podcast as you're doing. But remember that you're doing this for two reasons. One is to send goodness into the universe, your thoughts, your intelligence, your ideas, your suggestions. But the other is you want people to be thinking, how can I hire her? What can I bring them in to do? What is it that I need that they can help me with? It's so easy to forget that second point and just get into the material or the creativity or the innovation that you're sharing. But remember, it's always to a purpose. And the purpose is to build a client relationship as a result of that.
Yeah, so well said. I think building a brand in a way that you want to build a brand, and there's so many different forums out there right now to be able to do that. And the credibility transfer that happens as a result of it as well.
Exactly right. That's exactly
Yes.
right.
John, it's been so fun having this conversation with you today. Is there anything else you would like to share that we didn't cover yet?
Oh boy, tons.
So
Invite
much.
me back and
Absolutely.
invite me back and we'll cover some more stuff. But what a pleasure it is to be part of this podcast. Thank you so much for the invitation and the chance to hang with you for an hour.
I appreciate you, John. You've shared so many very actionable insights. And so I'm excited for the listeners to hear this. Tell us about where they can find you and the resources.
Sure. You can find me at the global newsletter that we've created called freelance-focus.com. If you join Open Assembly collective community meetings, you'll see me there. I'm an expert in residence part-time at Open Assembly. I hope you'll read my articles in Forbes and other places. And gee whiz, I hope I get a chance to meet each and every one of you out there. It may or may not happen, but it would sure be good. And I would like that very much. So with that in mind, gosh, try to find me. There's a good chance I'll be teaching in a university near you. There's a good chance I'll be speaking at a conference near you. And please come up and introduce yourself and let me shake your hand.
That's phenomenal, John. Well, thank you. We'll put the links in the show notes to what you just shared. Definitely go subscribe to the freelance-focus.com newsletter. It's such a wide range of topics related to freelancers. And it's so important, I think, for independent consultants to give you just a synthesized thing in your inbox every week that helps you to think about the bigger picture. So that's a great place to start. Go do that. And thanks for being here. And we'll see you again soon, John. Thanks again.
Thanks, Melissa.
Bye. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melissalieberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.